Map Radio Network.
Presented by Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
The NBA season has started, and oh man, are there a lot of interesting storylines to discuss. So we go out to the Progressive guest line right now, and we bring on Joe Wolfond, who covers the NBA for The Score, and he joins us right now on our Progressive guest line. Joe, it's Jake Asman here. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So a lot to cover with the NBA. We'll get to the Ben Simmons situation. We'll get to what has happened with the Lakers as far as what happened with Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard last night. But I want to start with the New York Knicks because I watched their game when they went to double overtime against the Celtics. Then they blew out the Magic last night. What do you make of the New York Knicks 2-0 start so far in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I felt like they got better in the offseason. I was still unsure of what to expect just because I felt like they played above their heads last season. So I thought there was a chance that even though I felt like they'd really improved their roster and specifically in the backcourt, I felt like there was still a chance for some pullback just because, you know, whether it was like the way that opponents shot the three ball against them last season or the way that they themselves shot the three, like there was a lot of areas where you felt like regression could be coming. So I think so far so good on that front. Like their offense has looked, to me, much improved, which was, I think, the big impetus for the moves they made in the offseason was improving that offense. I mean, they go and get Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Fournier was obviously massive in that win against the Celtics. And I think it's just like the mandate for them was like they needed to get more shot creation. That was what undid them in the first round of the playoffs. Like they just didn't have anybody who could really create shots in the half court. It was too much on Randall's shoulders. And I think they're going to have a lot more of a diversified offense this year. That's really going to help. To me, I think, the big question mark was like, was their defense going to suffer for it? And I think we saw a little bit of that in the Boston game. It's tough to tell against Orlando because I think Orlando might legitimately be the worst team in the league this season. So I don't know how much you can take away from that game.
Right. But
I think like the game against Boston, Jaylen Brown goes off for 46 points. And I think a lot of that was just shot making on his part, but also, the Knicks last year, like they had two very solid defensive wings. They had Barrett and they had RJ Bullock. And it's like, they let Bullock walk, which I don't think was the worst decision in the world considering, the guys they essentially replaced him with and the needs they had on offense. But not having Reggie Bullock there, essentially, like if you run into a team with two good perimeter players, like with some size, like two good scoring wings like Boston has, then suddenly you're kind of up against it a bit because Fournier has to defend one of those guys, and he's just not as good a wing defender as Bullock was. So maybe they see some regression at the defensive end of the floor, but for the most part, I think it's been a really encouraging start for them.
You look at just the moves they made. You mentioned Fournier, and then obviously they bring in Kemba Walker. Just as far as point guard play, to have Kemba Walker as your starter and then Derrick Rose come off the bench. I mean, watching this Knicks team, I can't remember in the last 20 years that they've ever had two point guards as good as those guys that they can stay healthy.
Yeah, and then you've got Emmanuel Quickley too, right? Who had a really impressive rookie season, I thought, and only played 8 minutes in their opener because there there weren't enough backcourt minutes to go around essentially. And then he got a lot more run in that Orlando game and looked quite good. But yeah, as far as their point guard depth, it's like that's been a soft spot for that team for so long, right? Like they just haven't had quality guard play. And they have that now. And obviously in the front court, they're pretty well set up with Randall making the leap that he's made and Mitchell Robinson, hopefully, being ready to have a healthy season because his defensive tools are just off the charts. Nerlens Noel, who filled in really capably last season. Like it's a pretty well-balanced roster with a lot of depth. And, I don't see them busting into like the top of the Eastern Conference, but they are definitely going to be right there in the middle. And I think, them upgrading the backcourt, to a level basically they haven't seen in I don't even know how long is a big part of that.
Yeah, final thing with just the Knicks, Joe. I got to look at their team. They finished 4th in the East last year, and I think I agree with you. I think they've improved a lot in the offseason here with the additions they made, plus just R.J. Barrett in his 3rd year taking a leap. Randall only 26, continuing to get better. So I think they can be, a much better team, but I think the East got better. So is it possible the Knicks are a better team, but maybe they don't finish necessarily fourth in the East this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than possible. I think it's probable, honestly. And I don't think that if they don't finish fourth in the East, I don't think that should be taken as a sign that they didn't have a good offseason or that they regressed even. Like they can continue to progress upon, what is suddenly looking like a very promising path and still not have the kind of regular season success that they had last year. I mean, I would expect that if they make it to the playoffs, which again is not a guarantee, like they could totally find themselves in like the 7 to 10 range and be in the play-in. Because as you mentioned, the East did get a lot better. But if they make it to the playoffs, I would expect, even if they're a lower seed, I would expect them to look a lot better in the postseason than they did last year, just because of the offensive improvements that they made, the areas in which they made those improvements, just like more capable shot creators. And it's going to be less, like they were so dependent on Derrick Rose in that series against the Hawks. He was the only one who was really able to create off the dribble for them. And that's just not going to be the case this time around. So I think, yeah, it's like if you're asking me now, like, are they going to finish in the top 4? I would say no. If you ask me, are they going to win a playoff series? I would say no. But that doesn't mean that like they're not a good team and that they're not, on the right track right now.
Joe Wolfond joining us here, covers the NBA for The Score. You can follow him on Twitter at Joey_W. That's DOUBLEYOU. Joe, looking at just the state of the NBA. I mean, yet again, you got the disgruntled superstar situation going on in Philadelphia with Ben Simmons. What are your thoughts just on how the Sixers have handled the Ben Simmons situation, and ultimately, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, it's really tough to say because, I mean, my personal feeling is they probably should have traded him in the offseason and they shouldn't have let it get to this point. But without knowing what offers were actually on the table in the offseason, it's kind of hard for me to say that, right? Like, based on all the reporting that's been done about Daryl Morey's asking price, I think that he has not really been negotiating in good faith, or at least he's not negotiating in realistic terms. Like the kind of packages that he's asking for are just not packages that he's going to get for what is basically a distressed asset at this point. So I think him going into the offseason with these like hardline negotiating tactics where he's refusing to trade Simmons for anything other than like an all NBA caliber superstar, or, I think the last offer we heard about from his end was he wanted CJ McCollum plus 3 first-round picks plus 3 first-round pick swaps, which is like, I don't know how much better you're doing than like a Ben Simmons for CJ McCollum swap straight up at this point, given, the state of Ben Simmons' trade value. And I also understand, like Daryl Morey is saying, I don't want to be strong-armed into trading this guy at the lowest point of his value. That's going to set our team back. It's going to make it less likely that we can really seriously pursue a championship while Joel Embiid's in his prime. So we're going to wait until, maybe a team like Washington goes into the tank and gets desperate. Maybe Portland goes into the tank and gets desperate. Like that's what they're banking on at this point, is that there's going to be another team that's going to be disappointing and a star on that team is going to ask out. And then there's going to be another equally desperate team that's going to suddenly see Ben Simmons as like their best option. Like apart from that, I don't know when Simmons is going to come back and play. I don't know if he's going to play for the Sixers after all this. It's such a mess right now. And it's kind of a mess of the Sixers' own making. Like, I don't want to underplay Ben Simmons' own role in all this, but like the Sixers have kind of exacerbated the situation at almost every turn. And they're just at this stalemate right now because the reality of the situation is like Ben Simmons wants to get traded, but he has no leverage with the Sixers because he has 4 years left on his contract. And I'm sure the Sixers would like to trade Ben Simmons if they could get a player that they felt like made their team better, but they have no leverage with the rest of the league because the rest of the league knows that the Sixers, like both of the Sixers options kind of suck right now. It's like either they trade him for an unsatisfactory return or they keep letting this increasingly toxic situation play out. And so, yeah, they're both just kind of stuck. And until I guess another team gets equally desperate, I feel like we're just going to remain in this holding pattern.
Joe, what do you make of the Lakers 0-2 start, and specifically, what do you make of the altercation between Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard during the game against Phoenix last night?
Yeah, I don't make a whole lot out of the altercation. Obviously, it's not great to see two players getting that heated when you're 2 games into the season. Like, it's a little early for guys to be getting that frustrated. But I don't know, both of them really downplayed it after the game, which is like what they should be doing. I mean, like, that's what they're trained to do, is to downplay incidents like that. I don't know if there's anything behind it or not. But as far as like how they've actually looked in these 2 games, like, I'm really worried. And maybe I wouldn't feel that way if I didn't already have some skepticism about the team coming into the season. But I feel like those 2 games have basically confirmed all the things that I was worried about, with the Westbrook fit, with the age of the roster, with the lack of shooting. It doesn't look great right now. And it's going to look better. Like, Westbrook will figure some things out. He'll figure out how to play off of LeBron and AD. The Lakers will figure out how to use them a little bit better. But yeah, it's dicey right now. Like, they don't look good. And they got to figure some stuff out pretty soon.
What to you has been the biggest on the court story through the first couple games here of the NBA season?
I do think it has been the Lakers, just because, like, that, coming in was like one of the most interesting things I think that I and probably a lot of other people were looking forward to seeing, was like, how is this going to work, right? Like, I didn't love the Westbrook trade for them. I just think that's not the type of star that I would have targeted if I was them. It's not the type of player I think that really LeBron ought to be playing next to at this point in his career. And so, like, one of the things that I've been tracking is, like, how often is LeBron getting to the rim? Because the Lakers aren't the best shooting team, but they should be able to beat teams up inside, because between LeBron, AD, Westbrook, like, that's a team that should be able to get to and score in the paint virtually at will. But what's happening is, because there just isn't a lot of spacing, teams are just kind of loading up in the paint. And LeBron, who's obviously still, for a guy who's about to turn 37, like, incredibly athletic, explosive, all that, like, he doesn't quite have the juice, I don't think, to get to the rim with nearly the consistency that he used to in a half court setting, and especially when teams are able to kind of pack the paint. And through these first couple of games, he really has been taking almost exclusively jump shots. And so that's kind of something that I'm going to be tracking going forward, is just like, how can they make that fit work? What are they doing with Westbrook off of the ball? Like, how are they making that trio work in conjunction with one another? And, is the supporting cast good enough to make this thing work?
Got about a minute left with you, Joe. So as far as the NBA's 75th anniversary team, who was the biggest snub? Who was the guy that you were shocked did not make the 75th anniversary squad?
I think, like, I don't know that I was shocked, just because for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to be appreciated, or like his prime doesn't seem to be appreciated the way that I should. But honestly, like, Dwight Howard, a guy he's been like a top 5 MVP finisher multiple times, like 4-time defensive player of the year. Best player on a finals team, like, legitimately, like, one of the small handful of best defensive players ever. So yeah, I was pretty surprised, but well, maybe not surprised, but that's probably the guy who stood out to me most as a snub.
Joe, really appreciate the time. You do great work over at The Score. Enjoy reading your coverage there. Thanks so much for a couple minutes talking NBA, and we'd love to get you on again soon.
My pleasure. Talk to you then.
Joe Wolfond joining us there on the Progressive guest line. Progressive makes it easy to bundle your home and car insurance. You can get your quote at progressive.com. Today, we'll take a quick break and talk more about this Dodgers situation. No Max Scherzer. So what do the Dodgers do tonight in Game 6 against the Braves? We talk about that next here on the Jake Asman Show. You're listening to Sports Map Radio.
Wake up call.